Hi, I'm Jeff Stark, Biblical Counselor with the Life Enrichment Christian Counseling Center, John Applegate and Associates, and the Philadelphia Renewal Network in the Philadelphia area. We're beginning today a new series of videos that are going to be centered around the theme of prayer. And they're going to be random videos, not in any kind of sequence that I'm aware of at this particular point. But my prayer life, something that I would have not typically been very proud of or have spent much time teaching about, has really changed in the last, I would say, 10 years. And I've learned some things that are very, very helpful to me. And I've passed them along to my clients, and I'd like to pass them along to you who are interested in these videos. There are two passages that have helped me to understand some things about prayer that I'd like to pass along to you today. First of all, in understanding the purpose of trials, James tells us something very interesting in chapter 1, verse 2, when he says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance." And so what I discovered here was that there's really one purpose for trials. And in our lives, if you're going through a trial, then it's important for you to know, what is God's purpose? Well, God's purpose in trials is that it would be a testing of our faith. And what that means is that trials are God's way of getting us to put our faith and trust and reliance in Him. Or in other words, trials are God's way of trying to get us to turn and rely and trust and depend and pray and ask and draw near to Him. And when we do, He supplies us what this passage says, perseverance. If you would like to learn more about these matters, you can go back to some previous videos that I've recorded, and they're titled Trials Number 1, Trials Number 2, Trials Number 3, and Trials Number 4. But what I began to realize was trials was God's way of trying to get me to draw near by faith and reliance and prayer on Him. Secondly, in that connection, in a similar such a way as what James chapter 4, verse 16 has to say about trials. And listen to this, and this was a second supplemental truth that I had learned, similar to what I learned from James. And Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 says this: "Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." You can look at this more clearly again under the purpose, the heading of trials in previous videos, but for our purposes right now, let's pay attention to just this quick verse here. Hebrews again is addressing a congregation that's going through difficult trials, or his term is, they're finding themselves in a time of need, a time of difficulty, a time of stress, a time of trial. And what are Christians to do when they find themselves in a time of need, or in a trial, or a hardship, or a difficult time? Well, it says here that they are to approach the throne of grace with confidence to get help in their time of need. The NIV says we are to approach the throne of grace. The American Standard Version says that we are to draw near to the throne of grace. And the New King James says that we are to come boldly to the throne of grace. And all of these images that are given to us, translations that are given to us, saying that we are to approach God with confidence, to get help that we need as we find ourselves in trials and difficulties. Now, what does it mean to draw near to the throne of grace? Well, if I were to ask my wife to draw near to me, or if I were to draw near or come near to my wife, what would happen would be I would get up and I would walk across the room, for example, and then I might be in very close proximity to her in a way that I wasn't in a moment ago. If I were to ask her to come near, if I were to ask her to approach me, if I were to ask her to come to me, then I would be asking her to literally change her location. You're over there, but what I would like you to do is change your location and with your feet, come on over here and maybe sit next to me, stand next to me, uh, change your location so that though we may be far apart, change your location so that my wife and I, for example, could be near to one another, close to another, close to one another. So I'm really asking in this case my wife or my neighbor to change location and to draw near so that we can be in close proximity with each other. Now here, that's what the author is encouraging Christians to do when they find themselves in a time of need. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that we stand up and we walk somewhere, we walk across some sort of a piece of ground and approach what the author calls the throne of grace. That's what we would be doing if we were to do this physically with our husbands and wives or our children or our friends or our neighbors. But obviously, that's not what the author is talking about here. But he is saying that we ought to approach the throne of grace to get help. So how do we do that? Well, obviously, we don't do that with our feet, with our physical feet. But it does mean that somehow we're to do it in our hearts. This is something we do in our heart and that we don't do with our feet. And so what this means is that our hearts are capable of and exhorted to and commanded to change location. That is to say that I'm in a trial, and when I realize I'm in a trial, a time of need, in my heart, not with my feet, obviously, but in my heart, God wants me to change location. It's curious. He wants me to draw near to him. He wants me to approach him. He wants me to come near to him in my heart. And so I find that curious, and that is to say, I find it curious that our hearts are able to change location even in ways that our feet are able to change locations. Or in other words, this is what I've learned. Generally speaking, we can be in God's presence in a very general way. We can have faith in him. Generally speaking, we can have faith in him, and we can be in proximity to him. But when I find myself in a season of difficulty, a trial, a moment of need, a time of need, God is telling me to do something specifically, and that is go from being in his presence generally to in my heart, changing my location and walking in my heart, so to speak, if I can, and draw near to him, specifically come boldly to him, approach him, draw near to him in a very much more intensive and much more personal and much more intimate way. I'm to change my location in a general way to a specific way. I'm to be generally in his presence, but I'm in a trial of need in my heart. I'm to change my location, and that is I'm to draw near to him. And he promises something very precious to us when we do that, as he draws near to us, and he comes giving gifts. So I find that curious that when I pray, that I am to approach him in my heart. And I'm aware of doing that. When I am at a time of need and I begin to pray, what I'm conscious of doing is in my heart, drawing closer to him in my heart and laying out my prayers and petitions and my requests and my pleadings and things like that. As I've learned that our hearts can change location, I've learned also that when I'm praying properly in these trials and times of need, there is literally in my heart a changing of location from a general presence of God's presence to a very specific and much more personal and much closer way. And I find that very curious, that I can change location in my heart, and I'm to do that when I find myself in a hardship and a trial. Also, in Mark chapter 7, Jesus is speaking to an audience, his disciples and those who are around him. And he says something very interesting that I think is applicable to what we're talking about here. In Mark chapter 7, listen to what Jesus says when he quotes Isaiah when he says this. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. Most specifically, he says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Isn't that curious? So people, and I know I'm guilty of this, I know that I can be praying to the Lord, but my heart is far from him. And Jesus is being critical of these false teachers and Pharisees and poor religious leaders who appear to be praying to the Lord, but we can apparently be praying to the Lord, but our hearts can be far from him. And what we learn from Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 is that when we do pray, that we ought to be praying in such a way that our hearts are not far from him, but that our hearts are drawing near to him, changing location and coming to him and approaching him in our time of need. I find that very interesting that our hearts can change location, and that when we are praying, we need to be praying in such a way that our hearts have drawn near to God and approach God in prayer. So I'd like to ask you to think about that and keep that in mind and consider your own prayer life. For example, I can find myself in a hardship and a difficulty, and I can pray and pray and pray to the Lord, but I've come to understand that I can be doing that, but not really drawing near to the Lord. I've become conscious of my heart's location when I'm praying, and I can find myself praying to the Lord, but I can be praying to him far away. And what I'm learning to do now is in my prayers, I'm learning that I can change in my heart my location, and I can come near to him, and I'm trying to learn how to do that more and more. As I pray in the morning, as I pray with my clients, each and every client, I pray for my client every time we start. I pray for me and my client every time that we close a session. I pray as I go through my day, as I think about certain things that I'm in my own particular trials, and when I'm laying in bed at night and I'm closing out the day, I'm aware of now and very conscious of the fact that when I am praying in those situations, I want to pray and want to draw near to him. As I'm praying for my clients, I'm praying for me, and I'm closing out my day, I'm much more aware of the fact that my heart can change location. And when I learn to pray now, I'm learning to draw near to him in my hearts. I hope that can be helpful to you as you examine your own prayer life. Have you been making the mistake that I've made, praying thinking that I am close to the Lord, but rather now realizing that when I am praying, there is a sense where I need to approach the throne of grace in my heart and lay out my petitions and prayers. I hope that's helpful to you. And we're going to continue this theme in our next video, which will be titled Prayer Number 2. Hope to see you there.